So you have to postpone your wedding. For many right now, it's coronavirus related. But even if it's not, even if there are other circumstances at play, how do you go about that? How do you postpone your wedding? Today, I'll be walking you through the 9 steps you need to take to postpone your wedding. Hi there, I'm Jamie Chang, your destination wedding planning guru and designer of joy at Mango Muse Events and the creator of Passport to Joy, the step-by-step online wedding planning course for couples. And I share real and honest and useful wedding planning tips, tricks, and advice you can use to help make planning your wedding easier and more joyful so you can create a wedding you love. Because let's be honest, wedding planning isn't always happy. In fact, it can be downright painful sometimes, especially now. Things are so stressful right now, right? And nobody wants that. We don't want that. You don't want that. So we're bringing the joy back to wedding planning. Are you ready? All right. So let's do this. Let's dive in. Tons of weddings right now are being affected by coronavirus, obviously. And thus, a lot of couples are now in the position of postponing and rescheduling in order to protect the ones they love and be socially responsible. All really important things. And while postponing is sort of not a new concept, it's not a very common occurrence. For times when it's not happening en masse for COVID-19, it's usually related to perhaps a military deployment or someone getting pregnant or just life changes that change your circumstances. But for most couples now, especially with regards to coronavirus, it's not something you ever thought of. It's not something you ever thought you'd need to even think about. And so the inevitable question is, how does this work? How do I do this? How do I postpone my wedding? So today we're going to be talking about that. I'm going to be walking you through the steps you need to take to postpone and reschedule your wedding for a later date. But before we dive into that, first, I just want to say that there are other options besides postponing and rescheduling. And if you're interested in what those options are, you can check out the Passport to Joy blog. I'll leave the links below where I walk through the different ways that you can postpone. All right, so let's dive in here. Let's just kind of dive right into these steps because there are a lot of them and I want to make sure you get all the information you need. So we're going to start with step number 1. So first, what you want to do if you're postponing and rescheduling, which for most of you, by the way, you will be doing this, you want to first let your guests know that you're postponing your wedding. Now, the easiest way to do this is via email, just because it can get out there fast, but you'll also want to make sure you update your website. And once again, this is the fastest way to get the word out, which is important, particularly in this COVID-19 situation, because you want to let them know as soon as you can. So email usually is best. Now, you might have to call some people, just depending on the situation, whether they're folks that are close to you and you just want to let them know verbally, or folks who maybe just don't check their email, like older guests. So make sure you take that into account too. Now, it's really important you know that you don't need to have a lot of information at this point. You don't need to have a new date. You don't need to know everything. All you're really sharing right now is the fact that you will be postponing, that you are postponing. That's the key here. So they can adjust their plans as needed. What you're really doing is sort of explaining the situation, which everyone will understand if it's COVID-19, and explaining that you're postponing and that you will be in touch with more information and a new date at a later time. And then if your guests need to do anything, if there's anything that sort of affects them in terms of some action they need to take, for example, let's say they have a room block reservation or something of that nature, then you're gonna want to give them any information that you do have, but more likely you don't have that information yet. So just address it. Just let them know to sit tight while you work on things, while you figure things out, and then you'll be in touch with more information once you have it. It's really important to acknowledge it because then you won't get the follow-up emails of what about this and what about this, because you've already sort of addressed that. Remember, the key here with informing your guests is just letting them know that the postponement is taking place and that you'll be in touch with more information soon. Okay, so that's step 1. Then we dive into step 2. And step 2 is about thinking about when you're going to postpone to. Now, everyone has different opinions on this with regards to, once again, coronavirus. But if you were my client, and I guess we could say, since you're here, you are, I would highly suggest that you don't even think about a date before October. It's just too risky. That would be my advice. And in all honesty, picking a date in 2020 is going to be a lot riskier than 2021. But obviously, I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does. And so all we can do is make the best decision we can given the information we do have. So keep that in mind. And what you're going to want to do is start by thinking about your schedules. You're going to want to think about your must-have guests and their schedules, and then just when you want to get married. Think about all those sort of factors in coming up with what your new date or time frames would be. And once again, I have to mention this, due to COVID-19, right, there are a lot of people, a lot of couples who will be rescheduling right now, who will be postponing their weddings. And so you want to make sure you have a good sized time frame that you're looking at. And what I mean here is give yourself at least like a month of dates, at least if you can. But the more open you are, the bigger those time frames can be, will just help you in terms of options, in terms of what dates are available and what you have the option of moving to. You'll also want to be open to, different days of the week, to different time frames, to even different times of the day. Because once again, there are a lot of people looking to reschedule now, and the more options you have, the easier it'll be for you. And we'll also talk about this a little more later too. All right, so let's move on to step 3. Step 3 is about rereading your contracts and talking to your contracted vendors. Okay, so first, what I want you to do is sit down, grab all those contracts that you signed and reread them. You want to take a look and understand what you agreed to originally, what those original terms were. And then you want to reach out to all your vendors that are contracted and find out what their policies are regarding postponement and cancellation. You want to obviously tell them that you are postponing, but you want to find out their policies because you might need them, particularly with regards to cancellation. Now, obviously, you're going to need them with regards to postponement, but you also might need them with regards to cancellation, which we'll talk about a little more later too. But it's important that you find out what those policies are now, because things are changing. And obviously, this is a different situation with regards to COVID-19, and people are being more lenient, more flexible. You just want to find out what that situation is. Now, for your venue specifically, you not only want to discuss those policies, you also want to find out what dates are available in those timeframes that you're looking at. Now, you don't want to do this with all your vendors because you're not ready for that yet. Just talk to your venue first and find out what the possibilities are in terms of postponing and rescheduling. Now, depending on what your vendors come back to you with regards to their policies around postponement and cancellation, you're going to potentially need to do a little bit of negotiation. Now, I could do a whole another video about negotiation, but let's just say for now, hopefully most of your vendors will be flexible and accommodating, and that's really the case that I've been experiencing with vendors. It's an unprecedented time, and none of us have experienced this before, with COVID-19. And so people are being really flexible, as much as they can be anyway. And so for the most part, that will be the case for you if this is your situation. But sometimes, and I've heard some stories that vendors are being a little bit tricky to deal with. And so you may have to result in some negotiation and or further discussion in order to figure out what would happen or what will happen given your postponement. Now, postponing obviously is going to be easier than canceling. So that's going to be what we're aiming for here for many, many reasons, both financially, for the vendors, for you. So think about that. Keep that in mind too as you're working through this. Simultaneously, if you have travel involved with your wedding, whether that's flights, hotels, which might be a slightly different situation, but any of that sort of travel related items. Now it's also a good time to start looking into those too, and either canceling if you can cancel, or you can wait if you have some time before your wedding date was supposed to happen. You could also wait and potentially just reschedule it if you have the new date by then. But think about those things too. And then, as I mentioned with hotels, if you have a room block contract or you have, say, a transportation contract, like remember those are contracts too, even though they're not necessarily, your photographer. They are wedding related. So you're going to want to make sure you reach out to those vendors as well and discuss with them their policies around postponement and cancellation. Okay, so step number 4. Step number 4, while you're waiting, because this is going to take a little bit of time, step number 3, and working with those contracted vendors. So while you're waiting, with step number 4, now's the time to talk to your non-contracted vendors. And really, these are the ones that you were very close to booking. Like perhaps you're just in that final stage of vetting or that final revision of the proposal, or just very close to sort of signing on that dotted line. You'll want to let those vendors know that you're postponing as well. And it's partially so that they're aware, but also so that they can put a hold on sort of anything they're working on for you. And that's really what you're going to be telling them, is asking them if they can just hold for a moment, and you'll get back to them with more information when you have it. Now, you don't need to worry about the vendors who you were just sort of initially talking to. This is really just for the ones that you're very close to booking or almost booking or nearly booked, or you're in the contract proportion, or you're just very close. Like you've chosen them, it's just a matter of finalizing the details. These are the ones you're going to be reaching out to. Okay, now step number 5. We're moving along here. Now, once you get some new dates from your venue, then it's time to figure out what's doable. Now, you're going to start by eliminating those you either can't do or those you don't want. And you might be left with one date. Very possible. If so, that's your date. But if you have multiple options that could work, you want to keep those options open, because that, once again, will give you more flexibility. And what you'll want to do is go back to your contracted vendors and find out if they're available on either that one date, if you have that one date, or share with them the multiple dates. And if you can sort of rank them in terms of preference, that's helpful too, because then they can tell you what's possible and what's not possible. Now, let's say you hear back from your venue and you don't have a weekend available in your time frame, or your options are just limited. This is when you're going to want to be flexible, which we talked about a little earlier. You're going to want to be open to different options, whether that's a Friday or a Sunday or a weekday, or maybe a daytime wedding instead of a nighttime wedding, or maybe a different time frame altogether. Maybe it's a whole different month. Maybe it's sometime next year instead. You're going to want to be flexible, because remember, given COVID-19 and all the couples who are rescheduling, it's just, there's going to be a lot of demand. And so flexibility is going to be your friend here. It's going to help you out and help you to find a date. Because unless you're very lucky, realistically, if you have a lot of contracted vendors, the chances that everyone can make that one new date is going to be slim. It's going to be a much higher probability that 1 or 2 vendors may not be available. And so in those cases, if that is the case, then you're going to have to cancel with those vendors, which is sort of not ideal, right? And this is when understanding cancellation policy is going to come into play. So if you have some dates, the question is, what do you choose, right? And every situation is going to be different. But based on the date options that you have, who's available, you'll want to choose the best date for you. And the question is, what is the best date for you, right? So that could be the one that you want the most, the date you like the most. That could be the one that the most vendors can do, so that you potentially lose less financially. It could be the one that the vendors you like the most or you care about the most can do. Or it could be some other reason altogether. You really have to do what makes you comfortable and what you feel good about. There's sort of no right or wrong answer here. It just depends on you and your situation and the dates you have available with regards to your venue and your vendors. Now, this process can take a little while. So keep that in mind, but also keep in mind that you'll want to make a decision quickly. Not rashly, but quickly, because once again, given COVID-19, everyone's rescheduling and you just want to jump on it. If you have a date that will work, that you feel good about, move forward. Don't sort of dilly-dally on it because that might come back to bite you in the butt. All right, so we're moving on. Step number 6 now. Now, step number 6, once you have a date, now it's time for new contracts or addendums. And so for the vendors that you're keeping, that you're using once again just at a later date, you want to get an updated contract and or addendum from them with that new date to sort of confirm it, make it official. For the vendors that you might need to cancel with because they can't do the new date, you're going to want to get an addendum that states the termination and the release of liability for both parties. So that way, once again, in the same vein, it's official, you're no longer working together, and you've both been released, if you will. Now, this process will take a bit to make sure all the new contracts have all the info and everything is accurate. But once you've gone through that, then it's time for step number 7. Now, step 7, this is when you're going to want to talk to the vendors that you hadn't yet contracted. So remember when we talked a few steps back about those non-contracted vendors that you were sort of close to booking but just hadn't officially booked yet, you're going to want to reach back out to them. Talk to them about the new date and find out if they're available, obviously. And if it all works, then you want to finalize that process. You want to contract them. You want to move forward, get that final proposal, get everything secured. And make sure when you're doing this, you're paying attention to their contract. Now, it's always super important to pay attention to your contracts. And once again, I could do a whole video on this too. But make sure you read it. Make sure you understand it. Make sure you're paying attention to their postponement and cancellation policies, especially with regards to all this COVID-19 stuff, because nobody knows, right? So make sure you understand that. And then just make sure you feel comfortable with that contract before you sign it. And this applies to sort of any situation, no matter what, okay? All right, now we're moving on to step number 8, okay? And now it's time to inform your guests of the date change. Now, this step and the previous, so step 8 and step 7, can also be worked on simultaneously. There's not really sort of one that necessarily comes before the other. They can happen at the same time. And I would suggest that you send out an email once again, because it's, once again, the fastest way to get in touch with everyone, to let everybody know. Call the people you're going to have to call, because there'll probably be some of those, and then make sure you definitely update your website. You can also sort of send, they have these now, these physical sort of change the date, postponement sort of cards. They're kind of like the new version of the save the date, right? It's the change the date. And so you can send those too, but emailing will definitely be the fastest and the easiest. And besides the new date, you're going to want to let them know that new invites will be coming out at a later date. Now, once again, going back to sort of that step number 1, and talking to guests about what they need to do. In the same vein, now that you have this new date, you need to tell them what they need to do on their end to make sure that you've provided them with all that information so that they know what comes next for them. Now, if you're having a hometown wedding, this could be nothing. It's really just, here's the new date, put it in your calendar kind of idea. But if you're having a destination wedding or one with a lot of out-of-town guests, you likely are going to have something in relation to a room block or something travel related that needs to get changed. And so you need to make sure you share that information with them so they know how to take care of that. That would be part of your discussion when you're talking to your vendors. You'll also want to touch base with your wedding party now at this point and discuss any changes that are the result of making this new date change. So that could be what they're wearing. That could be things like parties, bachelorette and bachelor parties or showers. Just make sure you talk to them about anything that affects them that they may be working on or buying or looking into, so that they have what they need to sort of either move forward or take a break or whatever the case may be. All right, now once you've done that, it's time for step 9, the final step. And this is going to be the one you're going to be very excited about, and that is take a break. Once you've hit step 9, it's time to take a break, because even though you likely have some planning still left to do, this process is exhausting. It is exhausting, and it's an emotional roller coaster, and you need some time. You need some time away from the planning, especially since now you have more time to plan. Give yourself a break. Give yourself a break to just sort of relax and refresh yourself before diving back in. A lot of people right now, with regard to the COVID-19 situation, are saying that you need to book your vendors like ASAP because everything's filling up. And yes, while that is technically true, you also need to do your due diligence, and you need to do your homework and make sure you're making the right decision. This is not a time for just quick decisions for quick decisions' sake. So take a break. Even if it's just for a week, take a break and get refreshed and get excited again about your wedding before you dive back in. You'll make such better decisions when you're in a better frame of mind and you've had some time just kind of away from it all. Okay? Now, I know that was a lot. We went over a lot, but I have one more tip for you before we sort of wrap this up. And that's really just as you hit step number 3, when you're talking to your vendors, you're going to want to create a spreadsheet that lists out all your vendors in a column, and then simultaneously sort of next to them, you have documented their postponement policy, their cancellation policy from their contracts, and then what those policies are once you've talked to them. And then once you start looking at new dates, you have a place to put those as well. And this will just help keep you organized through this process. And then when you have new dates, when you start thinking about what that decision will be for those new dates, you can use this because it will have tracked all the information, and you can use it to keep you organized and to help make that decision. So, it doesn't have to be fancy. In fact, it can be super duper simple. But once again, it'll just help that process. It'll help keep you organized. It'll make sure you have somewhere to reference if you've forgotten, because there's a lot of information with all this and nobody's going to remember it. So having it in this one place just makes it easy on you. And once again, in the end, helps to help you make your decision on a date. Okay, so we went over a lot. I know we went over a lot. So if you have any questions about postponement, about coronavirus, about your wedding, about what to do now, please let me know in a comment below. I really am here for you, so I want to help as much as I can. And if you liked today's video, please like it, give us some thumbs up. You can check out our other wedding planning videos for even more tips, and make sure you hit subscribe to get all the new ones. And if you want help, especially during this hard time, through the entire wedding planning process and have access to a personal advisor, please check out my online course, Passport to Joy. You can find all the links below, because you deserve to enjoy your engagement, even if you're postponing. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye!